What is up, everybody? How we doing? How we feeling? Welcome to the second episode of the FinalVibe podcast. My name is Kevin Reap, and I will be your host for the day. And this episode that we're about to play for you, ladies and gentlemen, is extremely special. It is exactly what we wanted FinalVibe to encompass all in one 45-minute conversation. The interview today is with Cody and Lydia Melton, the owners of Gnter Hans in downtown Columbia. It is a European pub and cafe that if you've been to, you've definitely been more than once. And if you've not been before, you should definitely find some time to check it out. A very unique beer selection and a large menu of European classics. So our interview this week is with Cody and Lydia, and we dive into a lot. They own a restaurant in the middle of a pandemic. They just welcomed their first child into their life. That allows us to dive a little deeper into entrepreneurship and business and legacy and life and routines and ambition. And we do all of that in a short amount of time. It's a really great episode. I am thrilled that it is the second episode we get to share with everybody. I do want to make a note that this episode was recorded on May 28th, 2020. That is 3 days after George Floyd was murdered on the streets of Minneapolis by a police officer. I was at that time doing my best to remove myself from as much of the news and Twitter as I possibly could. But we did not talk about the protests or systematic racism or George Floyd at all in this episode. And that's my fault as the host. I was not at that time aware in any way, shape, or form of the George Floyd situation. That changed very dramatically, very quickly, of course. And since then, I have shared some thoughts online about how I feel about the situation. And I just wanted to point this out before you guys listen and wonder why we did not discuss this in this episode. But it will certainly be a topic of conversation as we move forward. FinalVibe is about improving our brains, our body, and just as importantly, our world. And a lot of people who are protesting right now or trying to have their voices heard are simply trying to improve the world. And I want to talk to people who are doing that right now. I want to talk to people who come from different backgrounds because I am a middle-class white male. So I don't have a lot of information to share, but I will certainly do my best to find information from other people who do know what they're talking about and then share that with everybody through the multiple avenues that FinalVibe can. I wanted to address that before we get into the episode. I think that you will love this episode and some of the topics that we are able to discuss. This is our interview with Lydia and Cody Melton, the owners of Gnter Hans. Welcome back, everybody, to the second episode of the FinalVibe podcast. I'm excited to be able to say welcome back now that we have the first one under our belt. That was last week with the owner of Camacho Coffee, Jesse Walters, and we are keeping the streak going of some pretty amazing guests that we've been able to lock down for the people that are listening to FinalVibe and excited about what we're doing. Today we are talking with Lydia and Cody Melton, the owners of Gnter Hans, a restaurant in downtown Columbia that I'm sure everybody is familiar with who's listening right now from the Columbia or mid-Missouri area. We're thrilled to have you guys. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Good to be here.
Fantastic. So there's a lot to talk about. You are both extremely impressive people who have accomplished a lot. Again, I said this in the last interview with Jesse Walters. You guys have done a lot in a short amount of time and had a tremendous impact on your local community, set large goals over the last few years, and it looks like you've accomplished those and continue to see success. And that's exactly the type of story that we're looking to highlight and hopefully emulate within the FinalVibe community. So we're pumped to talk to you guys about that. I want to start with a little bit of the where, why, and how this whole thing started, because you guys have brought the best European food, beer, and wine to the middle of Columbia, in the middle of Missouri, in the middle of the United States. I feel like there's a little bit of a story there. So I was wondering, was it a bretzel that you had whenever you were a child? Is it a family history? What happened to bring Gnter Hans to Columbia?
I was always the lemonade stand kid, and except for we did Kool-Aid because, that was much cooler as a kid. But I kind of always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know what I wanted to do specifically. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to study abroad my senior year of college, and I went to Belgium, and it really was amazing. The culture was so different when I got off the plane, they were actually having a Geneva festival. And I'm not a huge partier, ironically, because I now own a pub, right? But so we got off the plane and they're having this Geneva festival. And I later found out that Geneva is basically the grandfather of all gin products, and that the birthplace was the town that I was studying abroad in. And it was so shocking to me, all of the things that they had there that I had never heard about in America. I got to try a whole new waffle. The bread, I lived right across from a baking school, and the bread was so fresh that I had never had anything like it. And I just wondered why that was. Why don't we have things like this in America? We are the capital of all things, terrible for you and delicious. So why isn't it here? And so that kind of became my goal, is to try as many new things as I can and then bring them back. And that's kind of how the idea for Gunter Hans was born.
That's fantastic. So a big part of Günter Hans's history, when you start doing some research, and that's a great story of how you kind of brought that concept of things that you had never seen here in the United States, more specifically probably a place like Colombia, to bring it here. But then what is truly fascinating about Günter Hans and the way that you started it was kind of how you went about fundraising. And I know I spoke about Jesse Walters, the person we spoke with in our last podcast, and we talked to him about taking the leap as an entrepreneur, and kind of going all in on whatever the big project is that you've been dreaming of. And you used Kickstarter to make that happen, I believe. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Kickstarter. I'm sure some of the people who are listening are familiar with it. I did a little bit of digging, and it looks like there are less than 100 companies that have started on Kickstarter in Colombia that have surpassed their goal. And Günter Hans is one of those, an incredible story. So tell us a little bit about what Kickstarter is and how you leverage that to validate this entire idea that you had.
Yeah, so Kickstarter is a crowdsourcing or crowdfunding platform, meaning that you pitch an idea to the general public, and if they like it, then they throw some money your way in exchange for a reward. In our case, it was product that we knew we wanted to sell, or t-shirts, or we actually have these really awesome steins. They're pewter, that were handmade in England. When you flip them over, there's like 6 stamps on the bottom that show what guilds it had to go through. So that was one of our big prizes. And basically, you pitch your business idea, and if people like it, then they want to back you, and they want to be one of the first people in on the product. And so we knew that we were asking for a lot, but a lot is what we needed to also go to the bank and get our loan. So we basically sat in the banker's office, and he said, restaurants, anything with food is really, really risky. How do we know that we can, trust that this is going to work? And I said, well, I tell you what, we'll crowdsource it. We will take our portion of the loan that we need to, put the down payment on, and we'll leave it up to the general public. And if there's enough buy-in in Colombia for this concept, we'll know, because they'll support it. And sure enough, they did. We actually raised over $20,000 that way.
That was in 30 days, Lydia?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about crowdfunding is that it's all or nothing. So you either have to hit your goal and then everybody wins, or you don't hit your goal and nobody wins.
Wow.
So how much money were you willing to pay a stranger to offer into the bucket if you were close to your goal, but you hadn't totally gotten there?
I think we were just praying for a Hail Mary at the end. And I even remember buying this book, and one interesting topic they talked about was the bell curve, about how people will really give in the beginning and people will really give at the end. And it's interesting because you have people in life that just want to get stuff done right away, right? And then you have your procrastinators. That is so true with Kickstarter. The middle is the worst. You're like, oh my gosh, is this idea going to work? We've only gotten this far. And there's some real seeds of doubt that come in the middle there, but
it's like fundraising purgatory.
Yeah. Yes. And actually, the other funny thing is, by the end of it, I was so conditioned to the sound that my email made when we got a backer that I forever couldn't hear that sound without thinking, oh, there's someone else.
You got some money in the inbox.
She actually made the set. She actually changed the sound to be sound like a cash register when we got that special email.
Whatever. I did not. I'm
That's
not even
amazing.
going to attempt to remake the sound, but I'm reliving it in my mind right now.
It's amazing to raise $20,000 in 30 days, and to have that crowdsourcing mentality is special, because you did kind of put it in the hands of the people. And it was, if this is something that they're interested in, they could show you that by kind of buying in. And I love the idea of the beer stein as well as kind of a gift to get people who are really into the concept very pumped up. And I'm sure that they've all loved that. And that was back in 2013.
Yep.
2013.
Yeah, and it was 2013. And then just one other note on those steins. So I still remember you had to give, it was $500.
That was a lot.
You had to give $500 to get the steins. And the steins are expensive. I mean, again, like she said, they're all handmade.
Sure.
They're all done by a guild. I mean, they were like over $70 a piece for the steins.
Yeah, they're custom engraved.
Yeah, and if you go in Gunter and look down right above that massive broiler, you'll see over like 24 steins up there. And we just never in our wildest years thought we'd have that many people that would be willing to go that far to put that much money on betting on us, is what it really was.
Sure. That is what it is. That's yeah. So sticking with business a little bit, I'm just kind of intrigued by this. You touched on the restaurant industry as a whole. It's challenging. It's extremely cutthroat. It's difficult to make it 1 year, let alone 2 or beyond. And you guys have not just survived, but thrived and grown and accomplished a lot of what you said back when you started this whole thing that you wanted to accomplish. And we'll touch on how the last 5 months might be an outlier in comparison to the successes that you've seen beyond that. But I'm curious, you have an MBA, years of business school experience, and now you have years of kind of boots on the ground experience actually, running a business. What are the pros and cons? And have you noticed that an MBA graduate degree set you up for this type of day-to-day that you're now living, or has the day-to-day experience been the biggest educator for you?
So I think it's kind of twofold, and I think it depends on what hat you're wearing in the business. So what I didn't realize when I owned a business is that I was going to have to know something about everything, just enough to be dangerous in each topic. So like I didn't go to school for construction, but we were under so much construction in the beginning that I had to know everything about construction to make sure that the job got finished. School didn't train me for that. That was hard knocks, HR was one of the topics that I'm so glad that I took in school, because it really sets up your foundational knowledge for what you can and can't do and kind of how to approach things in a very procedural, paper-like way. I think an MBA is great for things like that. What it's not great for is really teaching you how to fire someone, because that's something that you have to learn doing it. Like there's no way that you can learn that from a book.
Oh, she really enjoys it. Don't let her lie to you guys.
Oh, whatever.
She's really good at it. She's fired me at least 3 times.
It's awful. The emotional toil, like you feel just as bad as that person, but you don't get it. It's like you don't feel that way because you're not the one being fired. At the end of the day, that's not. So I think it really depends on what the topic is. There are just some things you're never going to be able to learn in theory. And there are some topics that I never would actually be able to execute if I hadn't gone to college.
Yeah, that's great. That was a selfish question. I'm in a spot where I've always every year around this time I debate an MBA. So then I love to talk to people who are kind of done that and now living the dream and doing what they went to school for. I just like to pick their brains and get an idea. So that's a great answer.
I think a free MBA.
That's the way to go.
Which you should go for.
Sure. Okay. I'll keep an eye out. Yeah, absolutely. One more question about the business side of Gnter Hans. Another question that I'm just kind of interested in. I think a lot of people, especially in Colombia, are. When I was doing research on you guys, Lydia, in Feast magazine, I think it was last year, you had a great quote in reference to your expansion of Gnter Hans. And you said, "Everyone loves a good party where you meet up with your friends, but the ones that you remember are the ones that are really different." And I was wondering if you could describe what a chaotic day is like for Günter Hans, the most chaotic days, the homecoming, the graduation, the days that allow you to really be a different party for Columbia. I would imagine the same way that Drew Lock wakes up on game day with a certain mentality, you guys probably do as well on those big days. So kind of walk us through what it's like to be the owner of a place like Günter Hans when Columbia is just at its craziest.
Oh, that's a loaded question. There's kind of a few ways that I look at that. Like, there's logistically challenging behind the scenes, and then there's like where you guys have no idea what's happening in the kitchen, or you have no idea, you know what I mean? And then there's days when it's so much forward facing, and I would say like homecoming of this year was a really great example because this was the first year they were actually allowed to sell alcohol at the stadiums. And so that became a challenge in and of itself, just getting people in the door, because we don't have a door guy. That's not our jam. You know, we've never had a bouncer. I never want to really have a bouncer. Next homecoming, we might have to have a bouncer, because I will say there was a lot of adults having a lot of fun at that game. And that game started early. Actually, maybe it was a late game because they might have been drinking all morning at the parade, gone to the game. And by the time we saw them after the game, we didn't need to see them. They just needed to go home.
Sure.
You know? So I would say those are very rare, you know, that it ever gets that interesting. But I would say that's interesting, maybe like in terms of, I think that's the question you're asking. I guess I'm not really 100%.
No, that's yeah. It's just there's so many people, and I look at the businesses in Colombia. I try to imagine what it would be like to operate them at the levels that sometimes need to be operated at. And I would just imagine that, like you said, from a logistical standpoint, that there's just so much going on and such a large team of people and so many things that you cannot control and so many people that are visiting. So I just wanted to get an idea of what it's like to be kind of sitting back the day before and just kind of preparing for that. But that makes sense, like what you said.
Yeah, I think the biggest prep days are the days when we have huge parties and events in terms of like an experience. So for example, the Hendrix Garden Party, we had Hendrix as a company came in and did this phenomenal. I mean, it was one of the most beautiful parties we've ever thrown in the beer garden. I mean, there were just roses everywhere, and there were 2 new types of gin that we were helping them to introduce. And that was interesting because it was a whole new concept. It's not the same thing we do every day repeated. You know, you have to nail every single little detail of this. And oh, by the way, they're going to use this in national coverage media type stuff. Like, it's going to be on their Instagram. It's going to be on their list. We once had New Belgium Brewing Company. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank now on what the name of the event was. Oh, Lost in the Woods. We were the first person in the nation to debut their sour beer that year. And that was really cool. Like, our little bar in Columbia, Missouri was the first person to get this beer. And oh my gosh, I did my happy dance. It was fantastic. And I love sours. And so there was a lot of pressure on that end to make sure that everything lined up perfectly the way that it was supposed to be. I would say that those are the most challenging and logistically difficult days, when there's just like a lot of pressure on you.
Absolutely. And well, not to dismiss the sour beer part, but I think a lot of people don't know what sour beer is. I love sour beer, but could you describe for the listeners what a sour beer is and what it tastes like?
Oh my gosh. So I'm a little spoiled when it comes to sours, because Belgium, where I studied abroad, actually is like kind of the capital of sour beers of Europe. Arguably so. I think the Belgians would really fight hard for that. So sour beer is, if you haven't had it, it's just like tart, and it can be ultra sweet, but think of like having a warhead, like candy when you were little.
That's so right.
It's like in a beer, and your tongue is doing this like, what is happening curly thing. And there's different degrees of sour, you know, but you have peach sours, you have framboise, which is like a raspberry kind, you have a strawberry kind. I mean, if you imagine it, they can probably make a sour out of it.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's
and
amazing.
also, how do they, and isn't it, Lydia, where they essentially infect the yeast, literally infect the yeast to produce that kind of that sour palate per se?
Yeah, so I would say it's different depending on the brewery, but some breweries have their yeast strains going for, 100 plus years, and they're just cooking them up. We actually got to tour New Belgium Brewery, and they have what's called the Foder Forest. It's a giant, like you imagine those wooden barrels of beer, right? Except for they're giant. They're like the size of a whole room, and they have like a whole warehouse full of them. And it's their, beer barrel forest called the Foder Forest.
Yeah, sour beers are amazing. It's almost like one of those things that was surely invented by accident.
Yes.
It's like somebody opened the barrel that had gone bad. Then we decided it was delicious after all.
Yeah, but don't throw it out.
Yeah, but definitely don't throw it out. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's great. There's a beer that I've enjoyed called Love Child, and I think it has like a 4.56. I don't know if you guys have had that one, but the local Macadoodles holds that, and it's one that I enjoy.
I have definitely had Love Child. It is amazing.
Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. Let's take a transition because you guys just had your first child, and we would love to know how that has impacted not only Günter Hans, but just you guys in general. We know that you obviously, started Günter Hans as a couple, and I'm sure that had its ups and downs and put its own strains on your relationship. But what's it like being new parents?
Yeah, so we kind of transitioning for work, we geared up so much knowing that I was on maternity leave and that the most successful business is one that runs itself and not runs you, right? So if I had to be in the building for this thing to work, then I didn't have a business, I had a job. And so I geared up. I'm like, we have an admin assistant. We had an experienced curator. We did all of these things. And we were set for when Evariste was born. And I think it was tremendously helpful. I felt like I actually got to have a maternity leave, which I know is really, really hard for a lot of entrepreneurs. Because at the end of the day, you're responsible whether you're in the building or not, So, and then COVID hit. And it was kind of like the tail end of maternity leave. And now I'm like, oh, I get to stay home with my son more. This is great. Oh, by the way, Codys is on paternity leave, is now working from home, so he can see him a little more. So I feel like our experience with having Evariste has been amazing and great, but I feel like it's just this completely different experience that a lot of parents didn't get to have because we really did get to spend more time with them.
Absolutely.
Would you say that's about right, Cody, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would. It was just a lot of, we prepared as best as we could, and we tried to have as many redundancies and plans in place that we could at Gunter.
And then they all went out the window for COVID.
And then, and then life happens, and things changed, and we had to adapt. We've had probably more change, even personally and business wise, in the last 3 months than I think we've had 3 years. So that's been interesting, navigating all of the different changes.
Yes,
but,
I would agree.
But you do it one day at a time, and you focus on the most important changes, and then you get to the ones that are not as important as you can.
So that begs the question, do you guys as business owners enjoy the challenge of being put through adversity in something like COVID, or has it mainly just been a pain in the butt?
It's kind of a pain in the butt, but let's be real here. You learn the most and you grow the most often when it's painful, right? Because you had to do it and it sticks with you a lot. And so for me, I find there are lessons in life you look back and you're like, gee, didn't I learn that lesson already? Why am I doing this again, right? But when there's like pain attached to it and it's more pain, you're less likely to do it again. I think this has just been a very stressful time, but it's really pushed us to our limits and forced us to grow. And as an entrepreneur, because I enjoy doing a different thing every single day, it's not as stressful to me as it probably would be for some other people. But I know that people that don't wear that mentality, and I'm sure Cody hasn't loved the wild ride that we've been on either, but it's just kind of depends on who you are and what you deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think the people with rigid routines have really been challenged by all of this. That's good to hear. Kevin, forgive me if I'm jumping the gun here, but I think it's a good time to ask, have there been any improvements that you've been forced to create in this mess that you'll continue doing either in your business career or in your just everyday lifestyle that the whole pandemic has sort of forced upon you for better or worse? Are there any positive things that have come out of for you?
Yeah, I think for me, well, at work at least, growlers. I had always dismissed growlers as a thing for internal reasons, which basically are that how are we going to sell this and then make sure that they're not drinking it on site because we're in a college town, so everybody's looking for a deal, and how do I sell this and then make sure they're not sitting in the back room drinking it, right? And so I kind of always brushed it off and dismissed it. And then we introduced it during COVID. And I was like, dang, I really like this. Now I kind of feel like an idiot for not doing this sooner. And guests really liked it. So I think now the question isn't, are we going to do it? It's what kind of container do we want to have? Like I want to make this thing really cool.
That's right. You have to have the best container.
I know, like, do we want steel growlers, glass growlers? Somebody showed me these like really cool porcelain ones. And for me, it's like kind of feeling like we're new again, right? Like I get to pick a brand new project and like have fun with it.
Yeah. And I just want to piggyback kind of off of, what Lydia was saying and kind of add my own personal reflection here on what COVID has kind of done and I think affected me long term. I think I sit here and I look at this business that we've built that's coming up on 7 years old. And, I look at our firstborn son that's coming up on 4 months old tomorrow. And I sit there and I ponder this thought of, no amount of money ever bought a second of time. And I have to balance what I put our time into. And it's like, could I help support my wife more on the business side, or could she work more on the business side and potentially drive revenue up and up and up? And it's at the same time, how do you balance that with, you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have the time to spend it with the ones you love, what do you do with it? So that's something I think I've really slowed down and tried to make myself be more intentional with the time that God gives me every day. And that's just been something for me personally.
Yeah. And adding on to that, even I've noticed that with Evariste, at least, we're both looking at him going, he deserves our attention at night when we're home, and business never stops. We're in a public facing business in which I get up during the day and people think, well, what's there to do? You have deliveries to accept, orders to fulfill, invoices to, reconcile, accounting to do, run to the bank. There's just a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. And while I don't do all those, you're certainly orchestrating everything. The bulk of actually what I do is done during the day. But the interesting part about that is that at night, that's when we're open to guests. So that's when, many problems arise and I'm getting the texts and it's, because at the end of the day, I'm the responsible one. It never stops. And so I think this has really kind of forced us now that we have a child to be like, what is the most important? And if something is broken in the system, how do we fix that? And it's not just fixing it for us, but it's fixing it for him.
That's fantastic. Everything that you guys just said is perfect. Cody, I want to challenge you, and Lydia, you as well, maybe put you on the spot a little bit. The biggest aspect of FinalVibe is that we want people to pursue their own personal ideal legacies. Whatever that means to the individual, whatever they want to leave behind, however they want to be remembered, that's what we want to be all-encompassing around. Legacy it's certainly a large word, but today, when you think about the lasting impact that you want to have on this world, what do you hope that is? Now that you have had a chance to reflect on the world differently and bring a child into the world, and like you said, Cody, go through more life changes in 3 months than you have in decades. What does that look like? What does legacy mean to you, and how do you want to be remembered?
Oh man,
That's a big question.
You just handed me the Gary steak at CC's here, man.
You kind of opened the door.
I got to chew on this one, man. I don't even have a straight answer on that. And, it's funny. I have thought about things such as legacy more recently. And part of that, in part, is I look at my grandfather, who's just turned 87, who just got to meet his first great grandchild a couple weeks ago through all of COVID. And we were balancing this great fear of, we don't want to risk getting my 87-year-old grandfather sick with COVID potentially, or also knowing that every day that goes by, there are fewer days ahead than there are behind for him. Every day that goes by is one more day that he potentially never gets to meet the great grandson for which Everest's middle name, Kent, came from. As I look to him, what he's built came from absolutely nothing. I can't really define poor more than my grandfather's story to, fairly pretty affluent individual with multiple homes now, etc. And it's, as I sit and reflect and talk with him, and he talks about legacy, it makes me think about those things more, about what's next, it's not so much about him. He's thinking about the next generation and what can I do for them. And I think that resonates so much more with me now, having a son, having a child, that it's not all the Cody and Lydia show anymore. It's about what are we setting him up for? And I think that's what legacy hits home for probably a lot of people, most people, is what am I setting my future family up for? And what hardships have I went through that and mistakes, especially many mistakes, what can they learn from my mistakes to hopefully not make those same mistakes? It's always better. My grandfather always had a good phrase. It's always better to learn from other people's mistakes than your own. Very true. You don't remember them as well. You really remember mistakes when you make them. But yeah, I think it's the knowledge and the life experiences that we pass along to the next generation, because life is so fleeting that it really hits home. If you ever go and look at a family tree sometime and just start to look back, you look back 2 generations, 4 generations, 10, 20, and it starts to go back hundreds of years, and it's unfathomable to us, but it's eventually one day our name is going to be one of those other little names on that giant tree, and we're just going to be another name in there. And what does that mean? And so, yeah, it definitely sparks those questions and those thoughts. So that's just kind of my thoughts.
That's a great answer.
Because we were thinking along very similar lines. We both go to church at the Crossing, and one of the things they always say is there's a lot of people that don't even know their great grandparents' name. They don't know their great great grandparents' name. And so for me, it's like, what is the legacy of Günter Hans? It's not that this is here forever and people always are going to remember who I am. That's not, you know what I mean? That's not what I get up every day for. I would like to go to work and leave behind a path with the majority of the people I work with are students, where they not say, this isn't my dead end job. This is my until job. I am doing this until I insert whatever their hope and dream is, and that it's a stepping stone that helps to get them there. It's something that they can learn life. They can make, not that we want to make mistakes, but we are going to make mistakes, and I hope they make mistakes with us and that they learn from them so that they don't have to make that same mistake when they have a bigger job with health insurance and more zeros behind the paycheck. So I think in terms of legacy, that's what I hope for, is that they can show up and look back and say, yeah, man, that was a great job and I learned a lot.
That's amazing. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're saying that you like being a steward of the upcoming generation and setting those people up for success in a very similar way to what Cody was mentioning about setting a son up for success, or any other children you guys may have in the future. Do you think that's more challenging than just seeing, I'm sure some of these young people that work for you as commodities, just people who fill the roles? I'm sure it would be easier to not invest in them rather than invest in them. So what makes it worth it to you to invest in them?
So it's interesting because with Evariste, our son, we're going to know his background, right? And so when I hire people, I don't always know their background. I don't know how they were raised. I don't know what belief systems they have. And helping them grow is really tied to that more than one would think. Because whether they trust my intentions or not is correlated to how they were raised, you know? And I think you just do it because you know it's the right thing to do. And sometimes the right thing is not always the easy thing, right? So like sometimes somebody screws up in a way that love is telling them tough luck, man. Like, no, you don't get to take cash out of the drawer and keep your job. You know, that is the right thing to do. That is helping them to learn to whatever, you know. And there's all different types of scenarios and all different types of people. And it's interesting to watch how they grow and how different it is for every single person because they all come at you at their own level. And you just got to take them where they're at and help them be their best. But it's not going to look the same for everybody.
I love that. That's great. That's great.
Yeah, beautiful answers. Appreciate you guys being so transparent there and opening that. Cody, you opened the door. I thought I'm going to ask the legacy question. Let's
just get deep, you know.
That was a very deep question.
Let's do it. I love it. So let's we'll do a U-turn. Let's go a little lighter. Over the last 60, 70 plus days since we've been doing the quarantine thing, what Netflix show, book, TV, movie, what have you guys enjoyed the most during this time that you would recommend to anybody listening?
Oh, Lydia, am I allowed to watch TV during this? I don't remember.
As long as it's not Tiger King. I'm just kidding.
That's what I was expecting that answer.
Let's don't forget about old Joe Exotic. I will confess Mr. Exotic and his lovely mullet are my absolute favorite snap camera skin whenever I happen to just walk into any professional business meeting that there is to have at work. Which I have done multiple times. I
may have seen it.
I think he has seen it. Don't forget the eyebrow piercing. It comes with it as well. It's wonderful.
Amazing.
Oh, it's amazing. Good stuff. I love technology when it works. I don't know. What is... Man, that's a...
Maybe this is harder than the legacy question. I just want
it's only hard because you haven't been watching any wholesome television, and this is business related, so you don't want to out yourself in public.
Honestly, Shark Tank is probably sadly. Yeah. I literally will be in the garage tinkering with stuff and have Shark Tank on, just mainly to see Kevin's reactions, talking about putting businesses out of their misery, taking them out back and shooting them. And seeing poor people's reactions. And then Mark Cuban's facial expression where the cameraman hits him about 20 times an episode where he literally just opens his mouth and looks at the other sharks. But I just keep coming back for more. I really enjoy that. So that's probably my go-to in the evenings is Shark Tank, which is really sad because that's business related.
Yeah, I'm reading or listening to actually Sell It Like Sir Hunt. And that's interesting. And actually, I came to the conclusion that I will no longer buy an audiobook unless it is narrated by the author, because it is so much more interesting when they are talking about it than when there's a random dude with a monotone voice.
Sure.
So I want to point something.
Yeah.
I want to point something out just really quick, just for your listeners. So this is... and maybe this is just me being biased or self-reflective here, but this is kind of, when you're all in on something, it hits every crevice of your life. You guys asked us about our favorite television shows or pastimes, and I watch very little television. The TV I do, I literally listed Shark Tank. And then here's Lydia out of left field that's like, I don't really watch television, but when I sit and read for fun, I literally read business books. Man, you're all in. If you're going to go for it, you're going to go for it, or you're not going to do it. And that's kind of the mindset I think it does take to say you're going to pursue something, whatever that is.
I would totally agree. It takes something on the level of Harry Potter. Think about how rare that is for that to come along, for it to rattle my world enough that I am going to climb out of my cave and, go read a 7-book series or whatever.
Yeah, but you also have to be intentional, and you have to be
I was
intentional.
all in on that too.
Yeah, and you've got to be intentional. I mean, it's bad. We find ourselves at the most common things we talk about when I come in the door, besides Evariste, is what's the newest news? How's the business doing? What happened today? What's going on with the legislation, with the PPP loan work, etc. So, we have to be very intentional to take time to not talk about those things. But you just find yourself in that kind of repetitive loop. But that's part of it.
That's an exception, though. I mean, I think when I look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how he's like, you have safety, and then you have food, and then you have, I'm putting COVID level crisis for a business under that safety category. And when it's changing every single day, it's pertinent to your world because it's rocking your world on a regular basis. So I don't look at that. Yeah, you're right. We do have to be intentional. And we've had that conversation before in the past, even pre-COVID. We have to be intentional not to talk about work. That was like piddle paddle compared to this.
Work is now required conversation for livelihood.
Right.
I would imagine this has taken over a lot of the conversation. I do want to touch on how our listeners can support you both and Gunter Hans, and how you think we could support other local businesses, maybe in ways that we haven't thought about. I know slowly things are opening up, so it's easier to support local business than it was 3 weeks ago. But what other things are we not thinking about that we can do to help out Günter Hans and all of the other places that we love around town?
Yeah, so we are creatures of habit. By and large, studies have shown that we shop at the grocery stores that are closest to us. We go to the gas stations closest to us. We just get in our habit, and that's what we do. But during this time, when bills are coming due for many small businesses that were forced to close, they rely on you and your support to survive, and you vote with your dollars. And so just be very conscious of the community that you're wanting to rebuild and you're helping to rebuild. Don't let it be the force of habit, because habit may not be what you want for forever. You might really value whatever XYZ store it is. And if you do, make sure you vote with your dollars for them, because that's what's going to make the difference at the end of the day.
That's a really good point, Kevin. I don't mean to sing your praises here, but I feel like every day I get on your Instagram, you're eating food from a different place in town. So I think you've done a wonderful job of that. My wife and I, we need to pick up the pace.
You do. I'm fortunate in that what was one of the worst things that I did, which was spend a majority of my money at restaurants, became one of the best thing I could do to support the local economy. So it was great. I was already doing it beforehand. But yeah,
the justification you were looking for.
Exactly. Yes. No, but the places like Günter Hans and literally dozens of others around Columbia that are really what make this city so cherished by so many people. I think it may be at a high level, it seems kind of silly to say it's restaurants, but when you think about it, restaurants like Gnter Hans is where you bring friends that come into town. It's where experiences happen. It's where relationships are made and made stronger. And a lot of great moments happen at restaurants. So since day one, that's been my biggest fear, is that we were going to lose some of my favorites. So I've done what I could, and I hope other people do as well, and help out in as many ways as we possibly can. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with us. We touched on many different topics. I think we could probably talk for another hour, but we'll let you get out of here. Is there anything else that you want to share or plug, or any dates that we need to know about? We'll probably share this episode in the next 10 days, I would imagine, probably sometime in the month of June for people listening. So anything else that we need to know about Gnter Hans, the opening announcements?
I just thank God that we have 2 patios, because there are a lot of people that don't, and they aren't able to open right now. And sure. What originally started off as, oh gosh, we have double the rent, right, with adding in the barrel room, has actually turned into a blessing, because now we have double the space. And so we're able to spread out. So if people are looking to get out of Dodge and go someplace that they're not going to be sitting on top of somebody else, we hope that they'll think of us.
That's amazing. And that room is phenomenal, by the way. When I first met Cody, it was in construction, and I had no idea that you guys had expanded. And when I went there for the first time, I was blown away. So
Well,
if you're
thank you.
listening and you have not checked out this new, it's the Barrel Room. That's what you
Yes.
call it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. If you've not checked out the Barrel Room, certainly check out the Barrel Room. Also, before we hop off, I wanted to ask a question. If you were to recommend the ideal Günter Hans experience for someone who has not been, what would you order?
So if they're a beer person, it's a liter beer and a pretzel because, we make them from scratch every day. If they are a liquor person, they should get the absinthe because most bars don't have that. No, you're not going to hallucinate, but we do serve it the actually correct way.
Minor correction: if you have 3 or more of them, you could think you're hallucinating.
Hallucination, awesome.
But yeah, we have the fancy glassware. We do the sugar and the water and we dilute it and we do all the things. And it's just, I don't know, it's just something really unique that you don't find a lot of places. And so I think that's the goal, right, of Gnter Hans. That's the spirit of Günter Hans. It's doing something that you can't do elsewhere. So we hope you'll check that out.
Perfect. Kevin, you want to wrap it up?
Absolutely. Lydia, Cody, I appreciate you guys, again, taking the time to chat with us, serving some of the greatest artisan food in Columbia at the corner of Hitt Street and Broadway. So check them out. Gunter Hans. Appreciate you guys' time. And that will do it for episode 2. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Kevin.
Boom. Just like that, episode 2 in the books. I'm having fun with these. I really am. I'm excited about everything that FinalVibe has already been able to produce and the people that we've been able to connect. Interviews like that with Lydia and Cody, they mean a lot to me because there's something about sitting down with people. And granted, we had to do it over Skype or Zoom or whatever, and we weren't face to face, but to just hear somebody's story has always been something that I've loved to do. So now that we're able to do that on a little bit of a larger scale and then share that with all of you is exciting. And I hope that FinalVibe continues to provide an outlet for us to do that. And we want to do that at a higher level. I'm actually putting a podcast studio in my basement. So that's in the works. So we're really trying to do this well and with high quality. We want FinalVibe to be something that people really buy into, not financially, but emotionally, because FinalVibe is not so much one specific thing. It is a mindset. It is a lifestyle. It is essentially your pursuit to your ideal legacy. And that's top of mind every day for people that have bought into what FinalVibe is. I'm excited about it. I think that it's going to continue to grow, and I'm having a blast creating some of the resources that we're just scraping the surface on some of the stuff that we're going to be providing and putting together both for free and then also for members. There's going to be membership involved with FinalVibe for people who are interested in going all in. They want more conversations like we just had. They want to surround themselves with people who are also trying to improve themselves and accomplish big, exciting, fun things that they've never done before. So that's the membership of FinalVibe. There is a lot of other information on the website, finalvibe.com, social media, at FinalVibe, all over the place. We will have more episodes coming soon. We're shooting for a weekly basis right now, so keep an eye out for that. Like and subscribe to this podcast if you have not done so already. Tell your friends. We want to keep this thing going because I think that it will provide a ton of value for everybody that comes across it, and that's what we want, is to come across as many people as we can. I appreciate you guys all listening, and we will be back soon for episode 3. And until then, take care. Thanks for listening.